I just talk a little about the setting. I'm just providing a setting here. Most of you probably would have already seen this slide somewhere before, but the key message here is that climate change, poverty, and inadequate infrastructure increase disaster risk. And this is so true in the Southern African region. And that slide will then give you a summary of the key issues that we meet in this region, which has got deserts, tropical rainforests, grasslands, sometimes all in the space of one country. And these become the home of very high levels of water insecurity, increasing vulnerability to climate shocks because of the huge temporal and spatial variability in available water resources. The fact that the region has many large shared river basins also calls for a multi-country response to climate change. With a paucity of infrastructure in the region, the disaster preparedness oftentimes is very poor. So this is really just literally a call to action for the type of work that CRIDF does. So you find that the mandate for CRIDF is really at the core of addressing these challenges. And for that, just as a small reminder of who CRIDF is, FCDO support for transboundary water management and infrastructure in Southern Africa for the key issues there. The bottom bar, if you like, the supporting anchor is really what we do. Project preparation, finance, implementation, exactly as Charles said earlier, to improve climate resilience for the poor. What I'm talking about here now is for the Save River Basin. Again, it's the setting that I've given you. And this is a river basin shared between Mozambique and Zimbabwe. And this is a basin where it has got a strategy that incorporates all the noble aspirations, a vision for healthy people, healthy environment, and healthy economies based on equitable access to water. But the current situation in the basin is very uneven infrastructure and also very uneven access to water. Sometimes you even find very poor people living next to a very large dam that feeds some very large irrigation schemes. The vision for this is water infrastructure to meet development objectives. And this is part of what CRIDF has helped the authorities to formulate. Water meeting basic needs for socio-economic development, vital ecosystems. As this river also flows into the Indian Ocean, there is an estuary that also requires attention. But more importantly, it's an area which is very prone to floods and droughts. I think you'll find that cyclones do happen in this region every 3 to 5 years. From Cyclone Helene of 2000 to the recent cyclones of Kenneth and Idai, you would probably know this from recent memory, that these are very key issues in this region, especially in this river basin. What did we do as CRIDF to work with the authorities or the Joint Water Commission for the Save River Basin? There are like 50 large dams already existing. There are 66 medium dams already existing, all of them in Zimbabwe. And there are 45 being planned to be built between Zimbabwe and in Mozambique. It's an area that is home to 3.5 million people. The river itself is 400 miles long, 41,000 square meters or 105,000 square kilometers. And it has got the single largest irrigation estate within Zimbabwe, measuring about 45,000 hectares. The total area under irrigation is in excess of 60,000 hectares. So the demand and competition for water in this area is huge. At the same time, it's also home to the poorest people in both Zimbabwe and Mozambique. The poorest, according to statistics, are resident in this area. So you've got huge developments, but very, very unequal and uneven access to water. So the key issues that CRIDF's work was looking at was to optimize the use of this existing infrastructure to enable the equitable access, and also come up with some way of prioritizing how those 45 planned dams would be implemented. So the first thing was to look at the data and say what data exists for both rainfall and for flows, to end up with a water resources yield model that could then be used as a decision support system for water sharing between the countries. What existed before CRIDF's work was a 37-year record of rainfall that we then used our modeling techniques to extend that 37-year record to 93 years. And straight away, that improves the confidence in the data between the two countries. And we also assessed all the flow monitoring stations to check their adequacy and accuracy. And then after that, with the existing dams, we then also came up with what is called dam operating rules, which is simply a methodology for making water releases to make sure that water is available at different parts of the basin at the different times of the year, so that as much as is possible, it's equitable access. In other words, there must be some water for everyone at all times, rather than in some, as was happening before, some dams would be full and some dams would be empty. Those that are full were not being utilized, and those that were empty, where everybody wanted to use that water. So that's part of the work that we did. And then we looked at all the dams that they had planned to do, did a multi-criteria decision assessment to say which would be the best to bring online and at what time to address the deficits and the increasing demands. And this is the data that we then collected and did. And just to give you a flavor of what this meant, before we started work with the authorities, the left-hand map there shows, you can see the blue dots. Those are the rainfall stations, only 24 that had been in use. When we did the work, we increased the number of stations in the data assessment to 94. And now you can see the density of those blue dots. That increases your confidence in the data because it's now getting quite representative across the basin. Yes, there is not many stations in the Mozambique side, but that was common for both use and actual data availability on the Mozambique side. But that helps because cross-border flows become a very significant issue when you've got an international or transboundary basin. This is just a flavor of the number and density of irrigation schemes that already exist, that we captured and digitized and showed that, look, the water use here, very large scale exists, but unfortunately also the poor were not part of most of these schemes because these were just large scale commercial. This is just a summary of the actual findings that irrigation accounted for 86% of the water currently in use, which is approximately 60% of the water available for use within the basin. And the other larger uses are the domestic, the small towns and villages that exist. And this gives a pictorial of where the significant challenges exist. And you can come from the left. The red is where literally there are huge deficits now. There is no potential for building any more new dams in there because they will not give you any returns or any more water. We call it a fully developed part of the basin. The greens, the light greens, where it says mostly okay, would be the areas where one needs to look at and say, where can we identify dams? Where can we identify water that can also be used to address the areas where deficits exist? At this point in time, the dams are what are easier to extract for large-scale use. We tend to protect our wetlands from exploitation because of, let me use the word, conservation demands and stuff like that. That's really why because of seasonal variability, dams play a key role that during the dry season, when you actually do need that water for irrigation, you then have it in a dam. I know that this is just to give you a flavor that we also had to look at estuary flows and say, what is the impact of the existing developments on the natural flows to the estuary? And what could we do? What would be done to improve that estuary flow? And that we then agreed to say we start off with a minimum of 15% of the natural flow to be available at the estuary. But of course, the studies on estuary flows are a completely huge and different study on their own. So what we did was to plant the seed to say you need to do more work here, because all we are doing for now is to keep the clock ticking, but more work needs to be done. So this is on the large scale. We also then address the issue of leaving no one behind. As I said, there are loads of poor people. 50%, actually in this area, it's about 67% of the population is classified as very poor. In other words, they live below the poverty datum line, which is less than $1 per day. This is a proof of concept type project where there were 120 families with a rural hospital that services 15,000 people with 80 deliveries per month. And we invested approximately £800,000 to build the infrastructure you see at the pictures in the bottom, a small weir or a small dam, solar for pumping, and the output was, for the first time, you could see there a 30-tonner truck taking produce from what people used to get only less than 0.1 tons per hectare. And in this case, out of approximately 26 hectares, they harvested at an average of 4 tons per hectare. So this was quite huge. And we created a constitution of beneficiaries where they all contributed to a maintenance fund. And that maintenance fund is a common fund that is then used to maintain this infrastructure, hopefully, and make it very sustainable. And the income that they made, the maximum that one family got was about $4,000 in a year, but the average was $2,000 to $2,500 per year from people who were making $1 per day or less than $1 per day. This was a hugely significant jump and in poverty alleviation. You can see here the transformation from what was happening before to what is currently happening now. We then used this project to get the Zimbabwe government to understand that rural development needs to be done at scale. And we assisted them to apply the Green Climate Fund, and I'm very happy to say the Green Climate Fund is already allocated and given $26 million under a UNDP-administered fund, with co-financing from the government of Zimbabwe of the order of 22 million. So the whole total for that program is now $46 or $48 million. And those dollars were born out of an $800,000 investment by CRIDF to prove that these things can be done and should be done. So this is just a pictorial. The fact that we did a water resources assessment, which then became a basis for water sharing agreement that is now going into the annex for an international agreement on water between Zimbabwe and Mozambique. We also improved the water flow monitoring for data, and we designed monitoring stations that we were going to build. Unfortunately, we couldn't because of many other reasons within that region. And that improves your disaster risk preparedness when we have good data. And existing infrastructure being used for equitable access and also disaster risk reduction. Multi-purpose dams, we then came up with a program that the two countries could target the top 4 dams for feasibility studies, where there would be shared benefits, probably a joint investment into one large dam at the beginning to make sure that both countries benefit from what will have happened. And yes, our proof of concept project is now influenced if not leveraged money from the GCF, and in Mozambique, the same. And I'm happy to also say in our engagements with FCDO Zimbabwe, there is a program that they have embarked on called CAWEP that also builds on the same principles of the work that CRIDF has been doing in the region. I think that's all that I have to say for now, besides the fact that we also assisted the authorities to now form a proper regional River Basin organization that manages these shared waters between the two countries.